Welcome back, everyone. I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker, which is made possible by the generous support of the Gulf Coast Community Foundation. Our speaker today is Emily Raboteau. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Emily writes at the intersection of social and environmental justice, race, climate change, public art, and parenthood. Her latest book, Lessons for Survival, Mothering Against the Apocalypse, shortlisted for the Brooklyn Public Library Book Prize and the Anisfield Wolf Book Award. Her work has appeared in The Atlantic, The Nation, The New Yorker, The New York Times, Best American Science, and Nature Writing. She serves as a full professor at the City College of New York and lives with her family in the Bronx. Please help me give a warm welcome to Emily Raboteau.
Hi. So as you just heard, I'm an environmental writer. I focus on climate change. I'm also a professor and a parent living in New York City. Before I speak, I just want to thank the Sarasota County government for its commitment to outreach and programming on sustainability, and especially the hardworking women on the organizing committee who rallied to bring me here all the way from the Bronx. This kind of like backroom, bureaucratic organizing, much like mothering itself, is often invisible and undervalued. So I want to say I see you for your nurturing spirit. Also, big congratulations on this being the 20th anniversary of this workshop. It's such a positive sign for the past, present, and future of Sarasota County that residents and business leaders and students and activists and organizations have this existing legacy of joining together, this structure for getting involved, and a yearly practice of envisioning a sustainable community. I'm not only honored to participate as one of today's speakers, but I'm also really inspired by all of you who showed up both here in person and also online to share climate solutions. So in return, because I'm grateful, I've brought two presents to inspire you all to add to your toolkit for adaptation. The first present is a really colorful postcard. You should see a stack of them on your tables in the room. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the rights to share this in the slideshow, but I'll describe it for people who are maybe watching online. It's called the Climate Emotions Wheel. I keep one pinned above my writing desk at home. It was produced by the Climate Mental Health Network, and it's really bright and colorful. It almost looks like a rainbow. It has 4 different quadrants of color. And it names a lot of different feelings. So, because my areas of focus are environmental justice and intergenerational justice and resilience, both infrastructural and emotional, in the area of climate adaptation and communication. I should say my aha moment in this space was Hurricane Sandy, which hit New York City when I was pregnant and got me really appropriately concerned and afraid about a livable future, but also really invested and interested in how to participate in sustainability. So there's a psychologist, Robert Plutchik, who's credited with the creation of the original emotion wheel. And the basic premise of such an image is that it will help us to better name and understand what we're currently experiencing. And putting words to feelings can be its own kind of relief. From my understanding of the work of Dr. Dan Siegel, which I first encountered as a parent of young kids, naming our emotions literally activates a different part of our brain, the thinking, reasoning part. And naming our emotions helps us communicate those feelings to others, which in turn helps us feel better understood by those others and is really valuable in climate communication fields. Sometimes we forget about the emotional aspect of this kind of work. As you can see, there are 4 quadrants of emotion in this wheel. There's a red zone that represents angry feelings, indignation, outrage, frustration, betrayal, and disappointment. The purple zone represents sad feelings, despair, loneliness, loss, depression, grief, shame, and guilt. The green zone represents fearful feelings, worry, anxiety, powerlessness, panic, and overwhelm. Those are the ones I get at night sometimes. They give me insomnia. And in the blue space, we have positive feelings: interest, empowerment, inspiration, empathy, gratitude, and hope. Those are the kinds of feelings we're probably experiencing today in this room. So seeing the emotions wheel is a reminder at the simplest level that there's a spectrum of states that others have felt before us, and that there are other options aside from what we happen to be feeling right now, especially if those feelings are in the negative sphere. And what I love most about wheels is that they tend to spin, leaving you in a different place than you started with. So why a climate emotions wheel? Well, first, the wheel shows that people are feeling climate emotions, and that's something we are still surprisingly collectively silent about, even though climate change affects literally everyone on Earth. Second, the wheel shows that there are many different climate emotions beyond anxiety and grief, which are maybe among the major ones. For example, climate anger is really important, and a recent study showed that it might be one of the most useful climate emotions, at least when it comes to spurring collective action. But I also find myself drawn to thinking about the positive climate emotions, which are all too easy to overlook, especially in the wake of disaster. There's a lot to say about hope. People often ask me where I find it, and I'll talk more about that shortly. But for me, as a writer, the positive climate emotion that I can almost always reliably access is interest, because I'm proud to be a curious person. For example, last night I left my hotel and I took a walk along the bay at sunset. It was difficult to safely cross the state highway by foot to reach the waterfront, but after crossing the road, I was interested in the sign that said "Caution, Manatee Area," not something you see in New York City. And I was interested in the teenage boys I saw fishing at a dock in the golden light. They were the same age as my 2 boys. And I was interested in the snowy egrets watching the boys net, hopefully. And I was interested in the widespread development underway along the shoreline. And I was really curious about the environmental connections between those elements in this zone where water meets land, human meets non-human. How are they interconnected? My brain wants to know. I live in a frontline inner city community with a lot of poisoning infrastructure that's bad for public health. My climate fears are about flooding, the urban heat island effect, and air pollution. Sometimes I relate my own various climate emotions to the 5 stages of grief as I pass from avoidance toward a sense of purpose, hopefully without getting mired in despair. And I find this wheel to be a beautiful representation of a continuous process of moving with our difficult emotions and rediscovering our resolve to be part of making things better collectively. It's always wise to start with gratitude, including gratitude for our own rage, pain, and fear, because those feelings are all signs of our deep connection to other living things. The trick is not to get stuck in despair. Where I live, anger, sadness, and worry are appropriate feelings to have when air pollution has given my kids asthma, the lack of green space has made our neighborhood hotter than wealthier neighborhoods, and flooding is worse as well, not to mention the existential threat of sea level rise. But as a mom and as a teacher, I can't dwell in those feelings. It wouldn't be fair to the young people I'm trying to raise to be good citizens. So I'm always looking for ways to move to the positive space on this wheel, and I do that by following my curiosity. As Mr. Rogers said, in times of crisis, it's always best to look for the helpers. When I'm feeling really bleak about the present and worried about the future, I look for grassroots activists and community members on the ground who are working hard to make things better in my habitat. And I use my writing to amplify those efforts. I consider these to be lessons for survival and beacons of hope. So the second present I brought for you today is a copy of my book, Lessons of Survival, which is about emotional resilience and how to cope responsively and creatively with the crises of our era. There are copies on a table in the hallway behind this stage. And if you'd like to take one, please do. The epigraph to my book comes from Jonas Salk, who asked, "Are we being good ancestors?" Because I'm concerned about intergenerational justice and intrigued by the great edict of Iroquois law to think 7 generations ahead, I wonder, how will our present actions shape the lives of our grandchildren's children's children? Lessons for Survival is a book with a lot of pictures in it, and most of the pictures are of birds. I'm going to show you some of the pictures in this slideshow. Are there any birders in the room? I knew there would be birders here. Okay, so birders know a lot about looking for beauty, tend to be deeply curious, and also to care a lot about conservation. As Emily Dickinson wrote, hope is the thing with feathers. So now I'd like to pivot to talk about the emotion of hope, specifically about something hopeful in my environment that reminds me of what we stand to lose because of climate change and all that is worth protecting. So birders might know the term spark bird. That's a term that bird watchers often use to describe the first bird love that drew them down the bright and rambling path of birding. I'm not really a traditional bird watcher, or I didn't start that way, but I do have a spark bird, which you see in this slide, the burrowing owl. A few years ago, I ran across this mural painted with 2 burrowing owls on the narrow storefront gate of a real estate business on 145th Street in Harlem. I spotted them after ice skating with one of my kids at the ice skating rink in the shadow of towering smokestacks at a park on the Hudson River. That park happens to be a concession to my community for the massive wastewater sewage plant that's hidden beneath it. When I ran into this mural, it was midway through Trump's first term. It was January, but it wasn't cold like winters when I was little, not cold enough to see your breath. And the owls in this mural were looking back at me with these questioning eyes, with their long, skinny legs perched on the colored bands of a psychedelic rainbow that seemed to lead off of the gray street into a more magical realm. So I pointed out these extraordinary birds to my kid, and I stopped to take this picture with the camera of my iPhone. And then on the corner of 149th Street, that's not the one. Well, there was another bird. As it turned out, there were a lot of them. The bird that I saw next was the American redstart, which was painted on the security gate of a pediatric office, which is the kind of place that treats asthmatic black and brown kids like mine when their asthma gets really bad. It had a really bright tuck of color under its wing, and it matched my kid's hat. So I took a picture of that one too. And then across the street, in the corner of my eye, I saw more birds. This pair of calliope hummingbirds painted mid-flight outside of a pharmacy. And that's when I started to understand there was a pattern. So after that spark, I started noticing scores of painted birds along my 2-mile walk to work at City College. Most of the bird murals in Upper Manhattan are spray painted on these rolled down riot gates of mom and pop shops along the gallery of Broadway at street level like this, as you can see. But others are painted up higher on the sides of 6-story apartment buildings. I'll just show you a few of the birds. You see them nesting and perching and roosting in the doorways of delis and pharmacies and barber shops. I saw Lewis's woodpecker at the Taqueria, the almighty boat-tailed grackle at the Buena Vista Vision Center. I think that was this one. Brewer's blackbird at La Estrella Dry Cleaner, and so on. There were dozens of bird murals. The osprey. And each one was marked in the corner with the name of an ongoing series to which they belong, the Audubon Mural Project. So, as it turns out, John James Audubon, the pioneering ornithologist and artist, once lived in this neighborhood. He's buried in a cemetery, in fact, at 155th Street, halfway between the apartment building where I lived at the time that I started taking these pictures and the campus in Harlem where I teach creative writing. Oh, that's the Pinyon Jay. That's one of the big ones. So Audubon Terrace was once a part of his estate, and it's now the site of a complex of cultural buildings. But there are other places uptown named after Audubon, including a housing project, an avenue, and the ballroom where Malcolm X was killed. And when you walk by these places, as I do, you can see many of the same birds that Audubon chronicled in his masterful 19th century work of wildlife illustration, Birds of America, in the form of public art. Oh, there's the red star, and that's my kid. The day we went ice skating, and I started getting intrigued by these birds. So this project is an unfolding environmental awareness partnership between a gallerist and the National Audubon Society and local business owners who donate their storefronts, as well as property owners in Upper Manhattan. The murals are sponsored through donations to Audubon, and they're painted by myriad artists, some of them local, in a diverse range of styles. You can see they're not all the same style. They're not all painted by the same person. And there are currently over 120 bird species depicted uptown. This is my favorite, the great gray owl. And I'm glad I took a picture of it because it's no longer there. Sometimes they disappear when businesses change hands. But the project aims to reach 389 birds, which is the number of North American species, sadly, according to Audubon's 2019 Survival by Degrees Birds and Climate Report, that are at risk of extinction owing to climate change. So that's an alarming 2/3 of North American birds. And I have attempted, because as it should be evident by now that I really love these murals, to photograph all of them. So I think of the birds as helpers because they're helping me and others who witness them to feel the grief and loss that are part of climate change. But really the helpers are the artists who painted the birds and the organizations behind the project, who also want us to experience joy and beauty despite the environmental degradation of our particular landscape. It's always a good idea, like Mr. Rogers said, to look for the helpers. So I'm really grateful for these birds. As with actual bird watchers, I never know which ones I'm going to see on a walk, and I like the element of surprise. So sometimes a new bird appears to have landed overnight. Older birds may be marked with graffiti or dirtied by weather and grime. I was really saddened to discover from the bus of a window while riding downtown that someone had sprayed over the tundra swan that I'd started to love. But I felt glad that I documented the tundra swan before it disappeared. As it turns out, if temperatures rise 3 degrees Celsius, 93% of that particular bird's breeding habit in the tundra of far northern Canada is projected to be lost. And because the Arctic is warming faster than anywhere else on the planet, tundra swans have nowhere farther north to go. As an amateur photographer, I'm drawn to the visual echoes between the fashion and the feathers, the postures of people and wildlife. I wish to document the tensions between human, bird, art, and commercial signage. I understand the project has landed in my neighborhood as the site for its campaign because of its connection to Audubon, and also because of the millions of endangered birds that migrate above New York City and continue to nest within it. But I also appreciate its potential for helping connect a low-income community of color to the green sector. So we'll stop on this one. So there's one, I don't think I have a picture of this one, but Amelia Earhart is quoted in the mural of the mangrove cuckoo at Manuel's grocery store on 152nd Street. And in that particular mural, it says, "No borders, just horizons, only freedom," which Amelia Earhart said. And that bird is described as a rare bird native to Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and the US. And unlike nations preoccupied with immigration, the artist states, "Birds see no borders." So I really love these birds for their beauty, the way that birders love actual birds, for the brush strokes of their wingspans that lift us from the drudge of survival. Sometimes the birds are reclusive. The birds on buildings under scaffolding even look caged. And sometimes the businesses that are struggling to pay escalating rents by staying open for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can only see the birds at night when the gates come down. So sometimes there are shops that close and haven't reopened, like the beauty salon with the laughing gull. The bird is always there. I talked to Audubon Magazine's editor-in-chief about this project, and she said, "We know that the fate of birds and people are intertwined, and that's especially true in communities that suffer disproportionately from environmental and human health burdens." They hope at Audubon that this project makes people literally stop in the streets and consider what's at stake with this critically important planetary crisis, while at the same time beautifying and drawing attention to neighborhoods like mine that have historically not been the focus of environmental protections. So to my eye, this project is at once a meditation on impermanence, seeing, climate change, environmental justice, habitat loss, and also a sly commentary on gentrification, as a lot of the working class passersby in these pictures are being pushed out of the neighborhood in a migratory pattern that signals another kind of endangerment. But most of all, these murals bring me wonder and delight. And I can hardly be called a bird watcher, but because this flock has landed where I live and work and parent and pray and vote, I'm learning a lot from them. So this is the Wilson's Warbler mural, and I photographed it at a storefront church, which is called Iglesia de Dios el Refugio. And those birds typically avoid the interior of the dense forest, and they prefer scrubby, overgrown clearings and thin woods. They stay in low, semi-open areas, and they breed as far north as timberline and thickets, second-growth bogs, along wooded streams, moist tangles, low shrubs, groves of willows and alders near ponds. They nest from coast to coast in Canada, but they're far more common in the West. In the Rockies and westward, Wilson's warblers are often the most abundant migrants in late spring. Their young are fed by both parents, but brooded by the female alone. Their diet consists mostly of insects, including beetles, caterpillars, aphids, and also some berries and spiders. 8 to 13 days after hatching, young warblers leave their nest. Their nest is usually on the ground, often at the base of shrubs, sunken in sedges or moss, shaped like an open cup made of dead leaves and grass, lined with grass and hair. If global warming keeps apace, 61% of its range will be lost. And here's what I can tell you in a parallel way about my habitat. I nested in a 3-room apartment with my mate and my young on the 6th floor of a mid-rise apartment building, around the corner from a commuter bus terminal, and 1 block from the on-ramp to the George Washington Bridge, which is the most heavily trafficked bridge in the world, in a neighborhood choked by poverty and highways. Our diet includes Chinese takeout from the Great Wall, roast chicken from Malecon, and pupusas from Mi Paso Centroamericano. On Halloween, our young eat candy they forage by trick-or-treating from the mom-and-pop shops along the business thoroughfare of Broadway. Across the street from the bus terminal is the church where we were married and baptized our young, and where an undocumented woman took refuge for months with her American-born children as part of the sanctuary movement to avoid deportation to Guatemala by federal immigration agents. 2 blocks north of this mural sits an office of We Act for Environmental Justice. That's an organization that empowers low-income people of color to advocate for healthy communities. Those are the helpers I'm talking about. It's really well documented that some of the most polluted environments in our nation are where people of color live and work. And as a result of risks, including poor air quality from heavy diesel traffic, dirty boilers, power generation plants, polluting municipal infrastructure like bus depots and sewage treatment plants, my habitat has a childhood asthma hospitalization rate 6 times the national and 3 times the citywide average. Black Americans are 75% more likely than others to live in fence-line communities sited near facilities producing hazardous waste. These birds became really integral to my orientation in the city. It's not really possible for me to consider the threats posed to them without also considering the threats posed to us. I couldn't tell you the exact cross-street ATM location where I and other city workers withdraw cash, but I could tell you that it's right next to the American bald eagle. When I talked to one artist about his artwork, Gang of Warblers, he said, "I feel as though warblers in particular can be important ambassadors for conservation, like a gateway drug." He's noticed it's often the spring migration of warblers, especially in the eastern US, that gets people interested and then hooked on bird watching. That curiosity leads to learning about these birds, and the first step to caring about something is knowing about it. The fact that these birds live in multiple countries also encourages a broader view of conservation. Like if a birder in Ohio wants to see the return of their warblers, they actually have to be invested in preserving habitat in Central and South America and the Caribbean. So there are 3 billion fewer birds in the US and Canada than 50 years ago. That's a staggering 29%. And why do we know this? Because of the bird watchers, who, having caught the spark and out of devotion, submit their observations to databases and help carry out population surveys year after year. Conservationists say the birds are dying because of pesticides, habitat loss, urbanization, development, as well as glass-clad high-rise buildings in front of which, especially during migration season, dozens of bird carcasses can be found each morning on the sidewalk after window strikes. And some researchers point to climate change. In the fall of 2020, scientists recorded a mass die-off of up to 1 million migratory birds across the US, Southwest, and Mexico. And so many of them had such little muscle mass that they seemed to have dropped dead from the sky mid-flight, like the proverbial canaries in a coal mine. And the ongoing wildfires of the West were also considered a factor. But of the disappearing birds, warblers are among the worst hit groups, and therefore the most commonly represented in these murals. Their population has declined by 617 million in the last half century. So the artist who paints warblers in my neighborhood for the mural project told me that he feels the barrier of entry to birdwatching and thus a connection to wildlife is really low. In his view, you don't have to go to a national park or a far-flung place of the planet to see them. They're everywhere. And one's connection and concern for them leads one to care about environmental issues everywhere. These birds in my home place led me to feel both interest and gratitude, even as they awakened me to what we stand to lose because of climate change. They inspired me to look for the helpers in my community and to connect with them, just as you are connecting with each other today. In other words, I credit these birds with giving me a bird's eye view, moving me into a more positive space. For example, I learned that even though I live on paved over wetlands in a low-lying community where chronic flooding and wastewater runoff is a problem with our increasing rainfall and outdated infrastructure, many of my neighbors have been working for years with city planners to unbury a brook. I'm proud to say that the daylighting of this waterway in my neighborhood is about to break ground this year. It's an act of climate mitigation and environmental justice, and it will be the largest green infrastructure project in New York City to date at a cost of over $30 million. There's going to be a pedestrian and a bike pathway running alongside this unburied river with native plants on the riverbank. And there are other examples of positive environmental change in my community that I've become interested in and empowered by. Activists who live in the poisonous nearby corridor of the Cross Bronx Expressway, which is a stretch of I-95, are leading efforts to cap the underground stretches of that road with trees to clean the air, to mitigate the urban heat island effect, to improve mobility and access and to create playgrounds for children. And this year I joined a volunteer corps to participate in New York City's latest tree census, which will help with the city's goal to increase our tree coverage to 30%, hopefully by the year 2030. The bald patches where we have less trees tend to be in the poorer neighborhoods, unsurprisingly. But participating in the tree census helps to show where we need to plant more new trees. And dwelling in the space of hope has activated me to look for the people and organizations on the ground that are helping to join those efforts. I look forward to hearing throughout the day about more sustainability efforts that are underway here in Sarasota County. And I hope that the Climate Wheels postcard will be a bit of brightness for you, just as the bird murals have been a bit of brightness for me. Maybe you'll hang it on your refrigerator or use it as a bookmark or share it with someone else. I hope it will serve as a reminder of something that inspired or awakened you at today's workshop as you continue the faithful work of sustaining your community. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Emily. I don't know about all of you, but I'm already looking forward to my next trip to New York so I can go explore this neighborhood. All right, we have some questions for you. How do you feel the promotion of social emotional learning in modern parenting and early childhood education is helping prepare us to tackle climate challenges?
Should I use this one, Sarah?
Yeah, it's just I get this working.
Well, I wish there was a common core curriculum that put the climate crisis, a solutions-oriented conversation around this in the center of education, but that's not happening. And so I, as a parent, I just, like I said, I look for resources that I can point to, just positive things happening on the ground to get involved with. And I can name a couple of resources that I have found useful that I share with other people. One is called The Golden Hour. It's a really great newsletter by a climate writer interested in climate emotions and also around parenting. Her name is Anya Kamenetz. I subscribe to that, and she's just really wise about sharing resources and ways to talk to our children. As they age, I think there are different angles we should take. Like my kids, you saw my kid really young. My kids aren't so young anymore. They're teenagers. They're 12 and 14. And so they can handle the conversation in a different way. But I think with youth in general, it is really important to stay in the positive sphere. They're going to live further into the future than us, and they're awakening and aware, I think, to the threats and dangers that are posed to us. And obviously burying our head in the sand or not talking about those things is a way of creating division and even distrust with our children. I think having honest conversations, but in a way that focuses on, like, how can we be involved, whether that's through protest or things like, here's a thing I do with my kids. We get alerts every time there's going to be a storm. Last week we had a rainstorm that dumped 2 inches of rain in 10 minutes. And our infrastructure isn't prepared for that. And so, but when we know something like this is coming, we go out and we clear the leaves and the debris from the closest storm drains. It's like a small action, but it helps us to feel proactive and involved and aware. And it's scary, like when you're seeing in the nearby, we live by I-87, you're seeing cars stranded in the water. But at least we can clear this storm drain in the vicinity of our house.
Who are some of your favorite helpers?
I'll name 2 that I talked to in this book. So I really wanted to highlight, people on the ground. And I think in all these efforts, to talk about sustainable architecture and big infrastructure projects, it's really crucial to talk to people from the community, particularly in frontline communities, who know what's wrong and who have a sense of what could be done to make things better. So One woman I talked to who had good lessons for survival is named Nilka Martel, and she runs an organization called Loving the Bronx. And not only is she involved with this sort of reimagining the Cross Bronx Expressway, but she also is really involved in like cleaning up the Bronx River and helping to establish a park beside it called Starlight Park, which is a wonderful place for the community to gather that didn't exist before her efforts to help make more green space in our area. Another person I talked to who had a lot of wisdom to share was named Lisette Norman. She lost her home to Hurricane Sandy. She lived on the shore of Staten Island and was so rattled by that experience that rather than thinking about rebuilding, she decided to radically alter her life and now lives in an RV. In a very sustainable, she's a survivalist, and she lives a very sustainable lifestyle, but rather than seeing herself as a victim, she has learned to live with less, to value being able to park in nature, in parks, among wildlife, and has just a different viewpoint about how, from her perspective, most of us are overly concerned with consumption and material things. So those are two women that in some ways aren't often given the mic like I am to talk about sustainability in places like this, but have a lot of internal wisdom and drive about sustainability and survival.
What lessons from the Bronx are applicable to Sarasota?
I mean, I think we have a lot of the same issues in terms of flooding. I was here for the architecture panel. Like I said, we're sited on paved over wetlands, and I think thinking about restoring wetlands and green space, one thing they're doing, in addition to daylighting this river that I talked about, is creating a lot of bioswales. Those are vegetated ditches, right, in the most hard-hit areas. But crucially, they're also training people who live by those bioswales to maintain them, right? Like become stewards and paying people to do that, like training them and paying them to make sure that the bioswales are taken care of and operating well.
I don't know if it's come to mind to all of you, but it also comes to mind to me that with our incredible arts community, we should be able to capitalize and have some kind of a similar project like this bird project. That would be fantastic.
I'm so glad you said that. Actually, the Audubon mural project, it's been so popular in Harlem and Washington Heights and Upper Manhattan that other cities, I think Detroit, maybe even Chicago, have also begun hiring local artists to create birds and make them aware. And you see the pictures; they're just beautiful. And I think that there's a lot of power in public art to communicate these issues in an emotional way with people that really resonates. There's a lot of public trust in art. We also have a climate museum in New York City that's relatively new that sponsors public art like this, and it has a physical space you can visit as well. But I think just as importantly, to have public art embedded in the landscape that people are walking through to acknowledge and inform is just a really beautiful gift to any community.
And also to keep us inspired by hope, because I think so often when we're looking at climate change issues, it is depressing, it is fearful, and just seeing those pictures of the birds was very, very hopeful. Our next question: how can we engage youth in positive projects that build hope and inspire motivation for sustainability?
I think starting by asking them what they know, what they're concerned about, being led by them. I think the youth are ahead of us in many ways. They have their own movements that we can amplify and participate in, the Sunrise Movement, for example. But also helping to connect them to other youth. Some kids, like my own kids, are not that comfortable with going to protests because they're noisy and there's a lot of sensory overload. But they are comfortable with doing more local things, like clearing out our, our storm drains. But always, I think, with kids, departing from conversations that center their own emotions, concerns, ambitions, hopes, fears, and dreams.
Do you have any idea how our tribal nature can be ignited?
How our tribal nature.
I'll let you interpret that.
I'm not sure what the person meant by tribal nature. However, I guess speaking personally, when I think about my own tribal nature, I'm trying to think more expansively about tribe, and I mean, I hope I indicated that when I showed, like, I think of birds as part of my tribe now. When I took a walk alongside the bay here in Sarasota, I saw as part of my tribe these boys that reminded me of my own children, as well as the manatee that I was told by the sign is probably somewhere nearby under the water, as well as the seagrass that you all are so concerned about. As well as the workers who are working really hard in the heat to put up these buildings along, right? As well as the snowy egrets who are watching the boys' fishing net, like ready to steal whatever they caught if they were going to catch anything. Like that, I think about all of these lives as being part of my tribe. It just increases my sense of like deep caring and love and concern. I'm trying to think less tribally in terms of like a minimal or how can I be deeply local? How can I really love my family? How can I increase that feeling of love that I have for my own children to all children, the children that I hope they will have? How can I be sensitively global at the same time that I am actively local? These are the things I'm trying to think about. Maybe it's a move away from tribalism or a way to kind of think increasingly about expanding the aperture of what I understand my tribe to be.
I think that was a fantastic answer, and it's a question I ask myself all the time, too. The question, I like the acknowledgement of the emotion in which I perch in the present. It seems to have the perch disappear, setting flight to a new perch, one of desire to do good. Has this model produced measures?
Probably. I'm not in the field of data science or statistics, but I mean, I feel like it must bear out that when we don't stay in a space of despair, when try to like depart from a space of gratitude, that we're able to be more active. I'm sorry that I don't have measurable statistics to share about that. I bet that somebody does.
What tools and methods should we use to foster community advocacy for resilient planning initiatives in our city and county?
I mean, you've heard a lot. That excellent panel, that excellent architecture panel, I found so inspiring. And I also think, again, like centering and involving frontline community members in these conversations is crucial and key. I felt so respected, for example, to be invited on a community walk along the pathway where they're going to be daylighting this river in my neighborhood. And one of the reasons I went on that community walk is that our property is really threatened by flooding. And so there's this sort of like, maybe that's a tribal or selfish concern that has to do with property risk. But this walk that I was invited to go on as a citizen who lived in the community in this threatened habitat also included people from the city council, city planners, Rebuild by Design. There were politicians, there were architects, there were engineers, and there was me who just lived there, and other people, mostly mothers, and we had things to say about like, okay, so when you resurrect this river and you're going to put a park alongside it and you're comparing it to the High Line, have you also thought about how that's going to change
the economics potentially of this neighborhood, that it's going to maybe drive up the cost of living here and push longstanding community members out? Have you thought about the fact that it's still really noisy right next to the major Deegan Expressway, and it might not be that pleasant to spend time on a bike or walking when we can't even hear you telling us about the engineering aspects because the traffic is so noisy. And furthermore, we're getting headaches because of the noxious fumes of the cars and trucks. It's really important to involve community members to think about design because we live there and we know what it is like to hear the constant traffic and to deal with the asthma. And those need to be baked in and built into design principle.
I see we have over almost 50 questions for Emily, and obviously we aren't going to get to them all. We'll take one more question, but make sure you catch her during the lunch break if you have others. Have you noticed a difference when communicating climate change narratives through a lens of hope instead of other emotions such as fear or anger?
Yes, and I also think fear and anger are important to acknowledge. I have figured out a balance in my own climate communication and writing of like 50-50. You know, chiaroscuro and Italian painting, like from the Renaissance, a way of thinking about a balance between dark and light. I have found that the writing I do seems to hit a nerve the most when I acknowledge how scary and hard this is, and at the same time offer examples of hope and action.
Please help me thank Emily for a wonderful presentation. Great job. Yeah, or you can give it. Yeah.